When someone tells you to Git Good, are they only doing it because they're an asshole? No, of course not. Don't talk soft. Now, having said that, there is certainly an element that fall back on the war cry as a way of flexing their epeen. Of course there is. It would be sophistry to claim otherwise. And honestly, even when someone isn't intending to be a dick about it, it's reached the point of meme status where it kind of inherently comes from an uncharitable place. Which does raise the interesting moral quandary around the efficacy of the term.
All this happy horse shit.
Should it be retired in favour of something more neutral so as to avoid the inevitable connotations? When one uses a word, term or phrase with loathsome origins, there are arguments to be made in favour of painting them with the malignant brush. Barring genuine ignorance of any negative understanding on their part, even using a pejorative in jest can be argued to be, well, precisely that, pejorative. Though I've read 1984 a few times over the years, and I have a great personal distaste to such binary thinking, and will fervently oppose the very concept. Hey up, less than 200 words in and we're already off on a tangent. In fact, the word 200 was the 200th word. Apt, eh? Counting the title, that is. Anywho, let's do this.
John, I'm going to tell you something I've never actually put into words before. I love shooting things.
By making words, anything, actually, by making things taboo, suppressing them, no matter how nobly intentioned, we become guilty of far worse than merely authoritarianism. Nay, in our attempts to protect the tender sensibilities of the masses, we only give more power to the undesirable. Pick your personal pet evil and insert it here. Then take a moment to think about it. The historical associations, how your chosen ill has been applied for maximum denigration over the months, years and centuries. It's unpleasant, I know, but this is an important thought experiment. If this thing you have chosen is so abhorrent, then why are we truly trying to erase it? Wouldst it not be better to bring it out of the shadows and parade it before the world at large? Part reminder of the potential harm that can be done, but more importantly so that it can be confronted head on. By shying away from the thing, you give it more power, not less. By your very attempts to deny its existence, it merely serves to make it all the more damaging when the less noble, or ignorant, so brazenly shove it in your face and let you smell what they consider wrong. Rather, let's try something different, because, definition of insanity and all that. Instead of running away and trying to pretend like it never existed, drag it, kicking and screaming, into the light, cast it down for all to see, point, and laugh, ridicule the evils. Show them you really are its daddy by making it pathetic.
Now, light our darkest hour.
Of course, it's not that straightforward. Things don't just change overnight, and there will always be differences of opinion about what is and is not acceptable. And there will always be those who latch onto the latter and weaponize it, precisely because they know calling you a faggot will get a rise out of you. All the more fervently because we're making a concerted effort to rob the word of its power. Believe me when I tell you, I know how utterly exhausting it can be when you have to expend so much energy to not care about something. It's never as simple as just, not caring, because there's always going to be some wanker going out of their way to get under your skin, to the point that the effort itself is what eventually gets under your skin. Not the word, action, or whatever, but the fact that whomever this imaginary straw man is, they just won't get out of your grill. It's Mr. S-Man that's the real issue, but the thing they're doing or saying retains the association because it serves as a reminder. I mean, that's how the word boy can still elicit such violent response when used, even in a genuinely benign situation, simply because it was thrown at black men with such vitriol, such smug self-importance for such a long time. Sad, but true.
Search your feelings, you know it to be true.
I chose that word precisely because it hasn't been condemned to the point of being a taboo, and thus serves as the poster child, pun intended, for exactly how we should handle such ill intent. Whilst there are still assholes that will try and belittle a black man by calling him boy, and I can only imagine how hurtful it must be, after only a few decades of shifting standards, there's much less of a sting now associated with the word. And as said above, while there certainly are still some who balk at the word no matter the content, for the most part, you're not likely to hear anyone asking, please don't say that, if you're talking about your baby boy, for example. Does that mean that we can do that with anything and everything? Well, yeah, actually. It really is that simple. On paper. Though making the swastika a symbol of protection, as it is, again, will take a lot more than just not giving a shit for a few decades. There are still far too many people who wield the symbol as a weapon precisely because of its disgusting connotation. But the opposition, who refuse to accept it as anything else, are just as much, if not more so, part of the problem. The primary reason Godwin's law has been enacted here and now before your very eyes.
If you ooze masculinity like some of us do, you have no reason to fear pink. Smash it.
So is it actually unhelpful to tell someone to Git Good when they are struggling with part or all of a video game? Yeah, it kind of is, at least on the surface. Even if the intention is only to use the term as shorthand for, sorry dude, you're just going to have to practice, the fact that it's such a flippant turn of phrase can be disheartening. Even when, as it generally is, it's followed up by more substantive statements offering advice on how to improve, or at least partially circumvent the roadblock before you. If you spend any time in the forums for the more difficult games on the market, you will invariably come across people throwing the term out, and pretty quickly at that. More commonly now, it seems, in the more cynical form of good you must get. And seeing that can put you off bothering to look further, because it starts things off on a distasteful footing. All the more so because, well, we already know that that really is your only option. You're not going to take Genichiro down without learning how to use the game's mechanics better. You're just not. His entire gameplay purpose is to test how well you have acclimated to Sekiro's mechanics. He really is there to be a roadblock to make you improve. I love that fricking game. Is it obvious? That's why I keep bringing it up. And will continue to keep bringing it up. It's also the perfect example of how useful it is to just get good. For all the reputation it has for being hard as nails, it's actually a pretty easy game. Now don't get me wrong, that's not to say there's no challenge, or that I'm somehow the uber MLG pro. But if you approach the game on its terms, even the mighty Genichiro becomes merely a minor inconvenience. Learning only two things, the Makiri counter and good parry timing, opens up everything. And the timing of both those things is shockingly forgiving. Plus, there are other tools at your disposal if you choose to utilize them. Especially in the third stage, you can throw the lightning back at him. That's really freaking useful. However, the key point is that practicing, actually getting good at the game, will turn everything around. Remove all the headaches and make your time playing as the wolf a breeze. And Sekiro is all the more rewarding for it. Like most games, obviously, you'll have a better time approaching it on its own terms. But more than most games, it's an active necessity for not having a fucking aneurysm. You may well just be able to brute force your way through, eventually. I did that with some of the bosses. But you don't have to. If you just take a little bit of time to get good.
There's no pleasing some people.
Now, Yakuza 3 on the other hand, getting better at the gameplay makes next to no difference. In fact, the inverse is true. Even before you start falling back on the most effective cheese methods, you pretty much leave yourself using only one combo because it's short and does a little bit of damage with the final hit. That has literally nothing to do with skill and becomes all about repetition of the only viable, intended unfortunately, option. It took a fair bit of digging in the Steam forums before I was able to find anything useful on how to make the game less of a grind. And even then, it pretty much all came down to exploiting the game's systems rather than learning them. For example, whiffing is extremely effective, by which I mean every enemy in the game, every single bloody one of them, will actually allow you to hit them once before they activate their adamantium block. Which is something you can exploit by deliberately starting a combo out of reach, so that only your most powerful attack is the one that connects, or at least the one that connects first. Then you can finish off your combo with one of your chip damage things, one of your chip damage attacks. So you get more damage done that way and you get it done faster. But again, that has nothing to do with improving your skill with the game. I mean, there's a degree of skill involved in learning the correct distance and timing to maximize the amount of damage you do by landing the correct attack, but it's clearly not how the game was intended to be played, meaning you're not actually getting better at it. Seriously, that game is a fucking grind. I am immensely glad that the Ryuga Gotoku team didn't double down and actually fix things in Yakuza 4. So, seeing a whole slew of patronising comments about how you just have to get better is a huge barrier to engaging with what is otherwise a really great game. Narratively, at least. One of my favourites from a story perspective.
This is awkward.
There's one key difference between the two, though. See, Sekiro was actually built around very specific game mechanics that are intended to be a requirement. Learning how the game works will, indeed, make you a better player and, more importantly, make the game a more rewarding experience. Like most of From's library, their very essence is to grind you down and shepherd you to getting to grips with how everything works. It not only encourages, but flatly demands you play the way the team intended to get everything out of it. It's why so many people struggled with it, because they were trying to play it like Dark Souls. It's not a Souls-like, it's a stealth action game. It was supposed to be Tenshu. Anyway. It feels awkward to be criticising the Yakuza team, because they've made similar decisions with their approach to the Amon boss fights. I usually despise boss fights, like truly loathe them. But for the most part, each encounter with Amon is a tense, frustrating, but ultimately satisfying test of my skills. I think what sets them apart from, well, the entirety of Yakuza 3 is that they don't have one specific approach in mind, but are constructed in such a way that you can form your own strategy. Some work better than others, some are clearly the recommended methods, but still, the battles themselves are versatile enough that exploiting a weakness feels like a moment of inspired genius on your part, rather than just gaming the system. There are other examples that I could point to, but these two serve as a perfect example of both the good and bad side of the Git Gud approach to, let's say, encouragement. Because the former is explicitly about challenging the player as part of its design philosophy, it brings people together, because everyone, regardless of skill level or intuitive understanding, can appreciate that the difficulty is the game. Meanwhile, Yakuza 3 is a fire and a miss. An idea that should have been shot down in the planning phases that somehow made it to the finished product. It's not a difficult game, it's just tedious and, well, boring. So it becomes much easier for the arseholes to boast about how they had no trouble dominating every encounter. Because it's true. And it's a response to an argument that people aren't actually making. People do love to knock down their straw men. We did it earlier. It's so much more convenient than forming a reasoned, considered argument against a more firmly rooted position backed up by evidential resources. So they throw out the Git Good as a misdirection, which allows them to stroke their own ego. It's it, actually. Without facing any real repercussion. It poisons the well to the point that people coming with sincere complaint just wander away to do something more productive, like scratching their balls on a brick wall or something.
What is the matter with you people?
Now, the ignorantly boastful are still attracted to discussions around the more widely accepted challenges. Of course they are. And they must get something out of it, because people like that are everywhere you go. It's quite sad, actually. I have to wonder precisely how unfulfilling is your life if you feel the need to brag about being a superior player at a video game. Just how conceited do you have to be? Unless you are competing at a professional level, where that is literally your livelihood. And even then, if you really are that good, people don't need to be told. Anywho, in those cases, the boisterous voices generally fall on deaf ears, and are lost in the milieu of more accommodating responses that actively want to bring newcomers into the fold. Like a shared misery, I suppose. When there is a genuine adversary to overcome, it brings out the best in people, promoting camaraderie. A desire to raise others up with you so that more can share in the spoils. It's a curious quirk of the human psyche. Minor tribulations engender the most appalling sense of superiority in those who overcome them, whilst a genuine obstacle makes people, generally, more comradely. It mostly comes down to the perceived reward for clearing the hurdle. When it's something that is an actual cakewalk, just enough of a step beyond the automatic to be noticeable, those who overcome it don't really want other people to know that it wasn't really all that, because if they did, especially if the first person did actually have some difficulty, however slight, it forces them to accept that they aren't as special as they want to be. See, there's no shame in admitting that something hard was, hard. But if it wasn't, and only seemed like it was at the time, well, you know how it is. Or do you? But that might, and should, have you wondering, how do they get away with it? Or at least, why do they think they'll be able to get away with it? Surely, if the hurdle is so small, then sooner or later, the majority will figure it out and call them on your bullshit. And you'd be absolutely dead wrong. Because things that do ultimately turn out to be minor annoyances become a footnote to the majority, leaving those who want to shove their daddy bags in your face to boast with relative impunity. Once conquered, the perceived challenge is quickly forgotten as precisely what it was, perceived. Meanwhile, there are still more newcomers that have yet to realise the relative insignificance, leaving them at the tender mercies of the self-aggrandizing that only have that one tiny little victory to cling to. And that's where those types get their jollies, further reinforced by the knowledge that, well, when something is only an annoyance, an irritation, most people just move on and don't give it any more energy, because that's all it is, an irritation. Why waste your time with it when there are more important things to focus your efforts on? Funny how that works. Except it isn't, because that's the thing. When something is small enough that overcoming ends up being no big deal, it's easy to just move on with your life, because it's no big deal. And though, at least in the case of games, the same is true of genuine challenge in most cases, the fact that it can boast of being something that will test you triggers that competitive edge. It will beat you. This time. But if you keep going, if you don't give up, if you just get good, then it will be your bitch. And you'll have something that really does hold some weight when you boast about it. But that brings us full circle. Back to where you've put Genichiro in his place and taught him who his daddy really is. You've had that huge dopamine hit. The act itself, the victory, becomes its own reward. You don't need to ride the coattails anymore. And that leaves you free to think on it. Well, if I had a problem getting here, other people will as well. And damn did it feel good to get good. Dude, you gotta try this. Because seeing someone else succeed, just knowing they got that kick too, well, that reminds you how good it felt for you. And that is how you relive the high. I'd like to point out, by the way, this isn't just me blowing smoke up your ass. None of this is coming solely from a stream of consciousness running unchecked. Everything stated here regarding human psychology is backed up by some rather extensive research and repeatable experimentation. I'm not going to link to any sources because I'm lazy and that's not what I'm about. I am more about the stream of consciousness. But nor am I going to expect you to simply take my word at it. Ironically, I'm genuinely recommending that you look into it for yourself. Do your research. All the stuff about dopamine hits specifically, but just psychology in general. It's an absolutely fascinating subject. Something I used to read about for fun while I was still in high school. I'm pretty sure I've mentioned that before. I checked out several textbooks from the library, college level, and just absorbed what was in them whenever I had time. Whoa. I still dip my toe in from time to time to this day, mostly to see if anything new has come up, though I'm not so conceited as to claim myself a master of the field. I have more often than not been proven correct in my hypotheses. Because it's worth remembering, this is still a new developing field with a lot of absolute bunk thrown in there, especially at the moment. But that's a story for another time, maybe. Also, I am not ignorant of how deliciously apt it is that at the end here, I'm doing exactly the same thing in more flowery, roundabout ways regarding human psychology. I'm recommending that you get good. And that's the key difference. Almost like I planned this. I didn't. Just happened that way. I've spent the last couple of minutes encouraging and extolling. You can call it a humble brag if you prefer, but I'm not out here trying to belittle anyone or make myself out to be the authority on, well, anything actually. But I do fully stand behind what I say. If anything is later proven incorrect, good! I love being wrong. I love, absolutely adore knowing I don't know something, because it means I still have something left to learn. An area in which I can improve, and that's the real difference between the two approaches. The former, the one that just wants to raise themselves up, is doing it for precisely that reason. But opt for the second camp. I want others up here with me. I want to share the view because it is glorious and it aids in the betterment of all of us. So when I tell you to get good, I'm not doing it to push you down, to shut you out. I, and those like me, we want you to be fully aware of what is actually required. Not only must you, but more importantly, you can. And who knows, maybe you'll do even better and you'll bring something new to the table for all of us to enjoy. Give back, you know? Making all of us better along the way. And sure, that might only be a new way to beat a tough boss in a game, but hey, it's still something, right? Something we can appreciate together. And isn't that what it's really all about? Not only should be, but actually is. Gaming, any hobby, it is something for us to share in. Whether we be the dregs, the outcasts, or Chad Thundercock himself.
I understood that reference.
Human beings are an inherently social, cooperative species. 160,000 or more years have selected for those traits. They're the very things that have led to video games existing in the first place. Games the scope and complexity of Sekiro and Yakuza couldn't exist from the labour of but one. Not in the current state, at least. Even if you allow for a theoretically limitless amount of time for one person to do the technical programming side of things, at the very least, they still need to cooperate enough with other people for voice work, licensed music, publishing, all that kind of thing. That goes back to dopamine again. Another great source of it is sharing in the success of those around us, even if we haven't experienced the same stimuli, like films. I remember watching First Night. Does anyone still remember that? It was a big deal at the time. Anyway, I was in a tiny 30-person cinema in Wales, maybe 50. And when Richard Gere's Lancelot lays the beat down on Malagant, there were two teenage girls behind me hissing yes and fist bumping. I fucking guarantee neither of them has ever even held a sword, never mind defeated an evil knight in a pitched single combat, but they still got the warm and tingly to see the good guy win. The good guy who has an affair with the king's wife while supposedly protecting her from the evil knights, but hey, whatever, just go with it. Look, Galahad he was not, that's all I'm saying. Anyway, let's bring this all the way back around and get to the point, shall we? When someone tells you to get good, are they being an asshole? Well, I mean, yeah, probably. But not in the way you might first think, at least not always. Not even most of the time. In fact, I'd argue they're being a bigger asshole than we first assume. Especially in the cases where they genuinely wish to help, because they come as the bearer of hard truths.
Strike me down with all of your hatred, and your journey towards the dark side will be complete.
Telling you that the only way forward is for you to make the effort and improve yourself. Now think about it. And I mean really think about it. Would you rather find out that they're just an asshole trying to buy you from something that isn't worth any squirts of warthog piss? Or do you want to be confronted with your own shortcomings? I fucking hope you're the latter, but we're being honest, so you're probably not. You probably want to avoid the real challenge. I do. We all do, mostly. And that, dear viewer, is precisely why the counter-argument has become the much easier stance of, they're just an asshole. Because we do love to fight our straw men, don't we? That's what it comes down to, isn't it? Look, if even NASA works by the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid, some of the very brightest minds on the face of the planet, if even they want to refine things down to their most fundamental level, the simplest, most direct understanding, what chance do the rest of us have? This is something that applies across the board. Of course, most commonly and obviously with those who like to proclaim their intention to offer a balanced, more nuanced discussion. It's just simpler to be simple. Shorthand exists for a reason and is deceptively appealing when tackling a more complicated subject matter. If you want to get to grips with something, you start with the groundwork, the foundations. Like how we tell kids you can't subtract from 0 until they're a little older and we start introducing them to algebra and trigonometry, imaginary numbers, negative numbers, all that stuff. Because it is much easier to get to grips with advanced arithmetic after mastering the simple stuff. Hell, we don't even start teaching kids about multiplication or even addition until they have a reasonable grip on simply counting, which is addition, but you don't know that at the time. Just take it one step at a time. We should, and do, understand this. But it is also far, far easier to remain ignorant of the fact that there is more nuance lurking beneath the surface in any field of discourse. And that's what's happening here, on all sides of the fence. The people crying Git Gud are just trying to kiss, and the people railing against them, calling them arseholes and insisting there is no merit in the war cry are doing the same from the opposite end. Binary thinking, in-group, out-group and all that. Why bother dealing with the broader issue when you can just point at the bad guy and talk like you're a Resident Evil villain? It all comes back to the dopamine hit of pwning the opposition. Just look at the huge swathes of videos on YouTube or wherever, where X person or group destroys Y. We've all seen the type. X destroyed by Y. X obliterates them. You know what I mean. You have your hero, cause, or whatever to rally behind and make you feel like you have the superior moral character. And no, I'm not innocent of this either. I make great efforts to avoid doing precisely that, but I am not infallible. And it really is easier. Strawmen are far easier.
Well, sorry. We thought you were dead.
I was. I'm better now.
So, bringing us right back around to the very beginning again. Are you an asshole for telling someone to get good? Yeah, a little bit. But you're also an asshole for saying anyone who does that is just an asshole. Because whilst they may be, you simply cannot know for certain. And the advice, simple and crude as it may be, is still valid, even when it's a very, very small thing. And I'm quite proud of myself for keeping on track so much this time around, though I will point out this is the second time I've written most of this script because I lost half of it somehow, which I didn't find out until I came to record it first time. This is off script, by the way, I'm just throwing it out there. Anyway, I've said that several times, but anyway. If you like what I'm doing here, or don't, all of the usual applies. Feel free to show people how insightful I am, or point and laugh at the sheer preening pretension. Whatever floats your boat. I also have a Patreon, if you are so inclined. Would greatly appreciate it. But whatever you decide, I'll be back again with something else in the not too distant future. I've already started working on my next script and have ideas for about 6 more. So, until next time, thank you for watching.